Hey everybody, the lesson's going to be a little short today because we're going to have our first vocab quiz. But let's talk through some stuff. I want to do a little bit of a review, and then we will have our quiz and have an activity afterwards as well. But first off, let's recap over what we've looked at with production possibility curves so far. Alright, so here we're looking at making mobile phones or making cameras. This example should look pretty familiar to you from your activities. So if Brunswick Cellular decided to produce 8 units of mobile phones instead of 7, what would be the opportunity cost of producing cameras be? So again, we're looking at making phones, or we're looking at making cameras. So just to look at some different hypotheticals, right? So if we made 3 phones here, we could make 30 cameras. If we made 7 phones, we could make 20 cameras. If we could make 8 phones, make 10 cameras. And so let's look at some opportunity cost here. So if we decide to make 8 phones instead of 7 phones, that means we're going from 7 to 8. So at 7 phones, we can see that we can make 20 cameras. All right, but if we go into producing 8 phones, well, now we can only produce 10 cameras. And so if we're looking at opportunity cost here, we're looking at what we're giving up by making this decision. And so if before we can make 20 cameras and now we can only make 10 cameras, well, then our opportunity cost would be 10 cameras. All right, let's look at the next scenario here. Because again, like let's say that you have a factory that can make both phones and cameras. Well, it stands to reason that if you make more phones, you can't make as many cameras as you could before. So if Brunswick Cellular decided to produce 30 cameras instead of 20 cameras, what would be the opportunity cost of phones? So we're going from 30 cameras, or 20 cameras to 30 cameras. So at 20 cameras, we can make 7 phones. But if we go up to 30 cameras, now that we're making more cameras, we can't make as many phones as we could before. So if before we can make 7 phones, and now we can only make 3, well then our opportunity cost would be 4 phones. Sorry, I should put cameras up here earlier. All right, so if Brunswick Cellular decided to produce 7 phones instead of 3, what would the opportunity cost of the cameras be? All right, so if we go from 3 phones, where at 3 phones we could have made 30 cameras, to 7 phones, well at 7 phones we can make 20. All right, so in that case, our opportunity cost is, again, 10 cameras. Now let's look at the difference here. All right, so going from 3 phones to 7 phones, and again, we don't know how much a phone is, we don't know how much a camera is, so it's really hard to tell. All right, but that's gaining 4 phones while losing 10 cameras, which is a way better deal than gaining 1 phone here and losing 10 cameras. So if you're trying to decide what to produce, going from 3 phones to 7 might be a much better option for you than going from 7 to 8. All right, I'll label impossible production at point D. Let's remember that anywhere outside of this curve represents what's currently impossible. This line, or this frontier, represents the most we can possibly produce. 8 phones and 10 cameras, 7 phones and 20 cameras, but right now we can't do 8 phones and 30 cameras. Anywhere outside of this curve would represent what's currently impossible. So it could be here, could be here. As long as it's outside of the curve, it's not currently possible, unless something changes, unless we get another factory, we hire more workers, we do a second shift. All of those could move that curve outwards. All right, and lastly, let's represent underutilization. Anywhere inside of this curve would represent what's inefficient or what's being underutilized. So if on a given day my factory only makes 3 phones and 10 cameras, well then I know something was wrong. I could have made more phones and more cameras. And so maybe the electricity was out that day. Maybe there was a strike. Maybe some of my employees got sick. Anyway, anywhere inside of this curve would represent what's currently impossible. Oops. All right, so I want to just go over 2 new things today, and then we'll do a quick recap. All right, so when we're looking at these production possibility curves, all right, they're not always going to be in this nice straight line. All right, they're not going to be in this nice curve. All right, and that's because it's never really 1 for 1. A good way to think about this is to think about what happened in China at the beginning of the pandemic. All right, so whenever China started getting hit by COVID-19, all right, since their government is a command economy, that means that they're in control of the businesses there. The government dictates to factories what they produce. All right, and so they told, these clothing companies, all right, instead of making clothing right now, you're going to be making masks for us. They told these TV companies, all right, usually you make TVs, but now you're going to make ventilators for us. All right, and so they told all of these different businesses, another good example, they were building a skyscraper in Beijing, and the government literally told the construction companies building this skyscraper, nope, you're going to put the skyscraper on hold, you're going to move all of your resources out to these hospitals, and you're going to help expand these hospitals so there's enough place. All right, and so by doing that, maybe it wasn't the most efficient way of producing these things, but they were able to produce them a lot quicker than we were. In the United States, we're only going to produce something if it's most profitable for us. And so a lot of businesses didn't want to shift production to masks because it wasn't really what they were good at. All right, and so we determine what we produce, first off based on how it benefits us, but secondly, how easy it is for us to produce it. If our resources work well, like there's a rum distillery downtown, they've slowed down their production of rum, but instead they're producing hand sanitizer now. For them, it's all pretty much the same materials, and so they were able to shift production really easily. For other companies, not so much. All right, and the other thing I want to take a look at are these decision-making models. All right, and so this is what goes through our head whenever we're making a decision, regardless of whether we think about it or not. So first off, we always are presented with problems. All right, and so let's say that we're looking at the problem that you all faced of, should I come to school this year or should I do virtual? Right? And so the problem, I guess, would be more COVID than school. All right, and so let's look at the different alternatives, right? You were given two main options, whether you wanted to do face-to-face or whether you wanted to do virtual. Other school districts have hybrids, but these are the two big ones that were given to you guys. All right, and so all of you had to think about what your priorities were. All right, and so for a lot of you, maybe you have a pre-existing condition, like if you have asthma, it would be kind of dangerous for you to be at school right now in case you get it. Or let's say you have a family member with pre-existing conditions or elderly members of your family. Maybe that's what your priority is right now. For some students, and I think myself included would be with this, is that some people just really don't learn well virtually. You can't really sit me in front of a computer and have me learn well that way. I kind of need to be face-to-face with people, but that's just me. And so you list out all these different priorities and you evaluate the alternatives, right? So for some people, the family members had to come first. If I had, a 90-year-old grandparent living with me, I might think twice about coming to school to teach. All right, but luckily I'm young, I'm pretty healthy, and so is my wife, and so for us, that was a lower on the list. All right, and then we've got to make a rational decision off of that. We're weighing out the benefits versus the costs. All right, and so the benefits of me coming to school is that I continue to get a paycheck. The cost is there's always a risk, always on the back burner. There's a chance that I contract it, that I give it to a family member, and that's terrifying, right? And so whenever we're making these rational decisions, it all comes down to what benefits us, what costs we're facing, and we've got to make a decision from there. Now, those of you that are a little bit more math-oriented, there's another way to look at this. Personally, this doesn't work as well for me, but I understand where it would for others. So let's say we just put this all out on a chart. Let's say we're trying to decide whether to go to college or whether to go to technical school. All right, so what we can do here is we can kind of mathematically decide what's the right move for us. So the first thing I would do is I would put out all of my different priorities. So let's say the biggest ones are cost, the amount of money that you can make from a job you would get with that degree, or the easiness of the program. All right, and let's put them in order based on importance. The highest number means most important, the lowest number means it's the lowest importance to you. So for me, when I was looking at school, the cost of the school was the biggest thing for me. And so I would put that as a number 3 for me. All right, secondly, I want to make a good bit of money from the job that I have. And so the next priority would be the income potential. And I'm not really worried about the easiness of the program. I'm a pretty smart guy. I think I can accomplish anything I set my mind to. And so that's the lowest priority. And now I rank the two schools, college versus technical school. Well, for cost, technical school's much cheaper, and so I would give that one a higher value. All right, whereas with income potential, usually a 4-year degree is going to earn you a little bit more than a 2-year degree. Now there's some exceptions to that. A lot of electrician jobs and a lot of plumbing jobs start out really high paying now. All right, and finally, with the easiness of the program, technical school generally be a lot easier than a 4-year program, but again, there are some exceptions to that. And so now let's just do a little bit of multiplication here, right? So with the cost being the most important one, for college we do 3 times 1, so that'd be 3. All right, and so for the technical school it'd be cheaper, so it'd get more points, it'd be 6. For income potential, it's the second priority, and so we'd do 4, we'd do 2, easiness of the program, 1, 2, and then we can just add them all up, right? So the total here for college, as far as my values, would be 8. And for technical school, it would be 6, 8, 10. All right, and so in this case, technical school would probably be the bigger thing for me, right? It costs less, and it's got a generally an easier program. And so based on my priorities, this would be the best one for me. Now, when you're making a decision, usually we don't put all of these things through the ringer before we decide, right? Our brain kind of decides these things pretty instantly. But for the more complicated decisions, it's good to make a pros and cons list. It's good just to sit down and say, all right, what am I going to get out of this decision? What are the risks? It's good to really think about these things before you pull the trigger. All right, good. I think that's it for the new material. Let's not worry about this right here. All right, so now you can go ahead and switch over to the Google Meet. We'll talk about our quiz that we're going to take today and the activity that I'm going to want you to do after that. Thank you guys and see you soon.